Perfect. Yeah, so that's it. I've obviously thanks for having me again. I've done this talk a couple of times now, so I know it's a common pathway that I think people typically are interested in. Um, for me personally, I started sports science with kind of the view of going to physiotherapy from there. So it was very much a journey that like I knew I was going to be on. So I knew I had a clear focus on how to get there and exactly what I wanted to do. And obviously now that's exactly what I'm doing. However, I will talk about my career now, which is kind of stepped sideways in some way. So I'll go into that a bit more shortly down the line. But yeah, just change the screen there. So my experiences so far. So like Laura just said there, started studying at John Moore's sports science course. The reason why I went straight on sports science was because I didn't have the grades at the time to go and to study physio. It was a lot more competitive at the time when I done my studies, because it was an NHS funded degree. So there was no student debt or anything like that, which obviously incentivized a lot of people to go on and study. Um, so yeah, so with that being said, it was a lot more competitive and obviously academic requirements were a lot higher, which I didn't meet at the time. So sports science was the pathway I wished to take, which was undergraduate in sports science and then a master's in physiotherapy, which is what I then went on to do. So I went from John Moore's sports science, graduated, went to Manchester Met, physio masters, and then obviously qualified as a physio then. And from there, I've worked in the NHS, I've worked in professional football, and now I'm working in a kind of cross role between private practice in Spire and in like a performance consultant role for Vald. So quite a different journey that I never really expected to end up on with, particularly with my latest role, which I'll go into. But it's important to mention with physio, there's a lot of, movement sideways as well as up in your career. It's not just like kind of a steady improvement. Like with most careers, you might move up in a nice strategic place. There's plenty of opportunity in physiotherapy, and I'd say that that's pretty much, follows suit of sports science as well. I'd say from experience working there, there's plenty of movement there as well. So my current role then, so I'm now technically a sports scientist and a physio between the two. So my role as a performance consultant with Vald. Vald are essentially a testing company. Work with many elite sport clients around the world. Use force plates, force decks. A lot of you might have seen the Nord board. So various bits of kit that allow athletes to be screened from an injury point of view, or also to monitor performance and any changes in peaks and troughs with things like that. So we work with pretty much everyone in elite sport across the Premier League, the NBA, the NFL. So I'm it's a big company in the sport world, and obviously we get to work with quite a lot of good clients, which is always good fun. So I'm now a performance consultant for Vald. So I go into the clubs and help with testing, do demonstrations, and support the clients out on the ground, which again is really good fun. So I look after the north of England. So my kind of client base is Liverpool, Everton, Man United, Man City, just to name the football teams. And then obviously you've got, your rugby and other sports as well in there, as well as now a lot of private physio clinics that have took on board the kit as well. So technically my role within that is very much more of what you'd think would be a sports science role. So I've almost went from sports science, physio to physio in the NHS, private practice, sport, to then now back to like kind of a sports science role within this. But then alongside it, I'm still a physio working privately at Spire Healthcare as well. So I've still got my clinical skills as well. But the reason I've put like the combination of the two on here, just to kind of put it there as a visual, is they're very much separate professions, but the power in having two is definitely an advantage for you if you were a student who went from sports science to physio or vice versa. There is definitely an advantage for you in that setting, particularly in the performance space. If you go down the route of like medical lead roles and stuff like that, because you have an understanding of both disciplines, which is ultimately two of the disciplines that make up the team in elite sport. So having an understanding of both is really, really powerful in that sense. So yeah, so that's where I currently am. So yeah. Next, so I added this slide in because I think it's quite important, because it was something I would have probably liked to know at the time when I was studying sports science, was how do you go from sports science to physio in terms of like and how does that look? So for me, obviously in sports science, I covered biomechanics, anatomy, human movements, cardiovascular physiology, and then, I sourced my own observational physio placements that were tailored towards my learning. And everything from there was included on my personal statements and my application to Manchester Met, and ultimately obviously ended up in me getting in. I know at the time the course structure might have been slightly different than it is now for you guys, but I went from year level 4 and level 5, first year, second year, and then you chose modules in third year, which, as I said, I tailored mine towards the disciplines in and around physiotherapy, or at least what it looks like on the surface from a teaching point of view. Because the course, again, the masters is extremely competitive to get on, because it's a very, very common pathway for a lot of sports science students, biology students, various health science people as well. So there's a lot of people trying to get on that course, and spaces are usually pretty limited. Better than it used to be. I know Liverpool are now offering a course as well, which was good, which would have been good at the time, because it would have saved me a journey to Manchester every day. But hey ho. But physio, then, what that looks like, you've got two options really in your transition from whatever course you're on now into that. You've got the undergraduate pathway, or you've got the master's pathway. Three disciplines in physiotherapy. You've got MSK, neuro, and cardiorespiratory. That's pretty much the fundamentals of what you need to cover in your application. You need to demonstrate an understanding and awareness that they are the three disciplines, and you're very much a holistic person looking at it like that. If you just rattle on about sport, or one particular setting in your personal statements or your applications, they're just gonna not take you on, because it is still really competitive, and they want to ultimately get all round students who they can teach the whole works to, and not so much people who go in with set ideas. That was some of my feedback that I got from a place I applied for. I think it was King's in London. I applied on the physio masters there, and they basically said I talked about too much about sport in my application. And then obviously when I applied to Manchester Met, I talked less about sport and applied it from a more holistic lens, and obviously ended up getting in. But essentially your physio pathway is a combination of MSK, neuro, respiratory. It's very different to a sports science course, 'cause it's very practical based. On sports science, we wrote a lot of lab reports, a lot of research papers. You do your research methods as a module and all those kinds of things. It's less so of a demand on like the academic side in physiotherapy, and more of a push on the practical side. So it's very 50-50 split, I'd say. Especially in the first and second year, and then final year is pretty much just dissertation and placements. That's for the undergraduate, and then the MSc is kind of a hybrid, but it wouldn't be as research heavy as my understanding of what a traditional master's course would be. So yeah, just wanted to touch on that briefly, and again we'll go into the next slide, which ultimately summarizes the MSc program. Just what it looks like. I'm not going to talk too much about this because I don't want to waste too much time, but just for you to reflect back on when you look at it, if you're deciding between the two, it's just a visual to have. This was my master's course program, pretty much, what it looks like. So as you can see, you got your respiratory modules, your neuro modules, and your MSK modules, and then in and amongst that, you've got your practical placements and your evidence-based practice stuff as well. As you can see, the three disciplines make up the most credits, and then your evidence-based practice is that's like a lit review. And then your autonomous practitioner stuff is like your dissertation and your lit review for your dissertation. And then that ties into obviously your dis there in the end of your second year. The masters is 2 years. It is full on. There's less breaks there, as you can see, compared to the undergraduate, which is split like you are now across 3 years, and a much more smoother transition. The options there, you get the only value of doing the masters over the undergrad it won't benefit you anymore as a physio, so to speak. It's not going to be looked at as any better qualification by employers. It's just if you ever wanted to go on for further study, if you've done a master's, you obviously then have eligibility to go on to further research-based stuff like a PhD or a prof doc or something like that. Whereas if you've done the undergrad, you'd obviously still have no master's credit. So that's the only real difference between the two. So it's ultimately what's right for you. For me, I wanted to get it done as quick as possible, but then I've spoke to other people who've done the undergraduate because they wanted to work alongside it, because financially they felt like that was the right decision to do. So again, that's just two timetables there to look back on when these slides are saved. If you're having a debate about which one to potentially apply for, my advice would always be apply for both because they are competitive. So if you want to be a physio, if you don't get on the master's program 1 year, you've lost a year anyway, so you may as well do the undergrad. My day to day, so I've kept this away from Vald at the minute because, like, being a consultancy basis, it's quite unique and it's very up, down, left, right. I can be anywhere, wherever the clients need support, training, things like that. So I've kept it to my performance schedule when I worked in football and also my health schedule in Spire, or the NHS outpatients typically works the same. Performance wise, football's very unique. It's very difficult to give a schedule. That's why I've put rough schedule there just in brackets because every day is different. The results on the weekend can impact what you're doing on the week, and that's the nature of the game. And the highs are high and the lows are low, which mirrors again the nature of the game. So just a rough schedule, for example, as best I could. For me, as the head physio, I'd 7:30 to 8:30 I'd be gym with the injured lads. 8:45, 9 o'clock ish, staff meeting, updating on injured players, how long they're out for, where they're up to with the rehab, when they can expect to be back. Looking at GPS data and objective testing data like the Vald stuff and saying, right, this player's fatigued, how'd they get on a weekends, might pull them out of training for a short time, might pull them out of that drill. This person needs extra work, all that kind of stuff you debate as a team, day to day, and then you'll ultimately probably have a bigger group meeting weekly as well. 9 o'clock till 9:30, and then obviously onwards throughout the day. If you've got multiple staff, you're ultimately doing your treatments. Again, with the injured lads and any lads who might not necessarily injured, but just like your therapy based stuff. So your taping, your pre-activation stuff, mobs, hands-on massage, that kind of thing. Like I said, very sports therapy heavy. That's all done before the lads go out to training, or the girls, or whatever discipline you're working in. For me, obviously, I was in men's sport. That's why I'm saying that. And then, that continues on throughout the day with the other staff. But for me, I'd always go out on the pitch. 9:30 till 12 is roughly like a rough training time. I'd do the warm up, take some pitch side lads out, whether it was running, return to play stuff, doing drills with that section of the rehab. And then alongside offering, pitch side cover for from a first aid point of view as well. Then 12 o'clock till like something around 2 o'clock roughly. Again, you're anywhere between your injured players back in the gym and other players doing extras in the gym as well, supporting in and around that. And then 2 o'clock onwards, again, could anywhere 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, could even be later in some days again. The results ultimately depend on how that looks. You've got your player support, admin and staff meetings and stuff. So that all ties in after that once the players have gone home. And then, like I said, that can be a very, heavy day. It can be quite tedious because it is pretty much, 5-6 days a week. Sometimes 7 for most people at certain periods in the season, particularly when you get higher up and you're working, with, cup fixtures and Champions Leagues and travels. I'm seeing that now with working like with Vald, going into these clubs and seeing how they work as a top environment, and it's a lot of hours that they put in. Again, obviously you've got to factor in this is a year round or a season round, should I say, job. It doesn't just stop when the season ends. It might change your day to day slightly. You might be in less short period off, but relatively speaking, there's a lot of staff working elite sport find it quite demanding, which is very different compared to the health sector, as you can see there. That pretty much is a standard day for me working on outpatients in a private practice. 8 till 8:30, I'll collect my patient list, do some admin. My first patient's at 8:30. I'll see patients right through till 3:30 with a lunch break for half an hour in between. And that's pretty much it. An hour for new patients, 30 minutes for follow-ups, 3:30 till 4 o'clock, my admin, and that's my day done. Go home, forget about it. So I've put the image there of work-life balance because it very much is so about work-life balance, depending on what's right for you. I don't think it's necessarily as simple as the scales that's shown in that picture. There's a lot of other factors that go into the work-life balance because it's what's right for you at the end of the day. Some people might find pleasure and peace in the chaos of sport. Like I quite liked it, to be honest. Um, that set schedule in the health sector for me is a bit boring and gets quite monotonous. So sport's good in the sense it keeps you busy and every day is different. So yeah, just a little day to day there, but we can ask some questions a bit more about them. I tried to summarize it as best I could. Skills and experiences. So you've got your skills, abilities, and knowledge really. To be a physio, that's what the question I was asked to answer. Difficult to say, really. I think for me, what makes a good physio is someone who can use theory and apply that to practice. So changing theory into practice and applying it. So you've got a combination like of that image there, skills, abilities, and knowledge all combined into one. Because it's all well and good knowing the ins and outs of pathologies and stuff of injuries and journeys, but if you can't, apply that to your patient's rehab, then it's going to be difficult for you to get any form of positive outcomes. And then another big side of that coin is your interpersonal skills as well. So your decision making, so when to progress, when to regress, how you structure a rehab plan. So, you might start from slow to fast, simple to complex, and work from there. Problem solving, you may not always know what is going on. Particularly in sport, sometimes players have a tendency to kind of say things that might not necessarily be how it appears to you in your assessments, and it might not add up, and you've got to problem solve that one out. And again, this is where like your non-verbal communication, your verbal communication, your listening skills, and also your ability to learn and get to know your patients and your players, because they've got to trust you. Because they need to share things with you that ultimately they may not share with the manager. In sport, for example, I always felt like the physio room was like a bit of a sanctuary. Like what goes on in there and is spoken there is necessarily not always something you may take out and reflect back on. Might be a bit of a therapy session in some ways for players. I used to have players coming in and just sitting there just while some of the other lads are getting taping or whatever and just chatting. And it's just a very relaxed environment to start the day before they go out to training. And I think there's a lot of power in that for them, really. So you being that figure that they can almost trust because you're not picking the team on a Saturday or a Sunday. I think that's where you've got to build that relationship. So your people skills all come into that, and that applies in the health sector as well, especially with your chronic pains and stuff like that. You've ultimately got to get them on board with things, and that's a skill in itself, and it comes from all these interpersonal skills here, and then, like I said, theory into practice. But there is much more than that. But again, I tried to summarize it as best I can. So I think this is the last one, I think, but career path and opportunity. So for me, when I was the head physio in sport, my pathway kind of changed in the sense I felt like my development's kind of stalled slightly, because when you're in that lead role, you almost become part, I'll just say it, responsible for other people's development. So, maybe staff who are with you alongside you, you're working with the team that is, ultimately the team you're leading on paper, and you're responsible for their development just as much as your own. So your own takes a back seat in that. You're spinning lots of plates to try and, keep everyone happy, to keep all the cogs turning, make sure the S&C coaches have got what they need, make sure the physio staff have got what they need, the consultant nutritionist who comes in, make sure they've got what they need or what they're recommended, and everything's tying in. ultimately equal success. And I think a good manager, and certainly what I tried my best to do when I was leading the medical department, was make sure everyone had what they needed to be able to perform well. And again, I think that's the key role really. And then as a sacrifice to that, I think your development kind of suffers in a way, but that's fine. It's just all part of the progression. But then I've just used an example here from like the NHS pathway just to kind of visualize it. So a typical career pathway for a physio in the NHS, you'd be a band 5, which is junior physio, band 6, senior physio, band 7, which is maybe like a team lead, and then your band 8, which is like a specialist or senior management. It looks quite simple in terms of it's a step up in pay and it's a step up in roles and responsibilities, and it looks clear like that, but there's a lot of steps sideways as well. You might go from band 6, you might not have any interest in being a team lead, so you could go from a band 6 straight to a band 8 in like a clinical specialist role. You might go from a band 6 to a completely different role in the private sector, or vice versa. The skills you learn are ultimately applicable everywhere, which is almost like a reflection of what I've done now. So obviously I've come out of sports, still working in private practice, and then the performance stuff, consultancy stuff's presented itself to me. Was that something I ever thought I'd be doing? No. Is it still relevant to physio? Absolutely, because I'm going in and I'm working with sports scientists and physios every day and supporting them, in a very applied setting on how the kit it can be used to inform decisions and better practice. So it's still very much applied. It's just like I said, that step sideways. It's not up or down. It's sideways. This has taken obviously pay out of these things. I'm talking solely out of progression in your career as skill set almost. And like I said, I'm still working privately in Spire to keep me hands on physio skills, so to speak, up to speed. But there's plenty of room in physio to move all over the place. You might go into therapy management where you're completely non-clinical and you're working on contracts and different initiatives and stuff. There's loads. It is probably, I don't know whether I'm biased, but it's probably one of the most diverse professions in terms of opportunity. I think of what some of my friends are doing who I was on the sports science course with, and the pathway they've took, be it S&C or whatever, and it's a bit more clear and logical in a forward direction, or a upwards direction, if you like. Whereas I think with physio, you can work in private sector, you can work in the public sector, you can do things what I'm doing now, you can work in insurance-based stuff. There's loads you can do. The opportunity is endless, and you only have to go on, the job website and just type in physiotherapist, and the amount of variety that comes up is massive. So definitely a good profession. For me, I'm loving what I'm doing at the minute with the performance consultancy stuff and the clinical stuff. It's great. I probably will go back into sport when the time's right. The only reason why I stepped out was because I've got a young baby now. So as you can probably think of with the sports schedule, a baby in the mix isn't ideal when you're not at home all the time. You miss out on valuable moments. So that was what drove my decision. But obviously I do love it. And there's a saying, with football, when you're in, you want out, and when you're out, you want in. And again, that's probably mirrors the nature of the game. But no, that's pretty much what I'd say really on the career path and opportunity for physio. But I've kept everything quite brief, because I could probably talk for 2 hours on everything here. And yeah, just open it up to questions and whatever you want answer. Laura's got my email there, and she's more than happy to provide that out if you've got any specific advice or guidance you need, particularly, not just generic, oh, how to get on the course. Like if it's more of a structured question, you've got a bit more of a decision on your hands, then I'm happy to help where possible if you need. And yeah, I think that's it from me. So I'll open it up to questions and pass back to Laura.
Yeah, thanks, Liam. That was great, and just like thanks for sharing.